Thank you for letting us know. All right. All right. Good evening. I'm here helping research the discovery made by Joe Devoy. I have to admit that I was a little bit skeptical when he first called me about this discovery. I think of myself as a strong academic. And so we decided we were going to come to the source of knowledge about the contents of that diary. And I'm here with Michael O'Mahony. Michael O'Mahony, can you talk a little bit about your experience with history and genealogy?
Yes, Matt. I too, I suppose, was a bit skeptical when I heard the story that Joe had found. But I'm a genealogist, and I'm also a local historian based in West Cork, so not too far away from where some of these events occurred. So I have been putting in some research in the meantime. So I think that the story holds up, as we will probably find out as we go through the interview over the next 20 or 30 minutes.
Amazing, amazing. So I just have a couple of questions about the discovery. Okay. Glad that Joe was able to get to Ireland and give you a chance to take a look at what he'd found. So as I said, we thought it might be a hoax, but from what we've talked about, you found evidence of a Sean Scanlan that lived in Cork and would have left around the time the diary says he would have been in America. So what did you learn about Sean?
Well, we have all land registers going back to the Middle Ages, the 1600s, which shows a family by the name of Scanlan, which would be the Gaelic for Scanlan, being the registered owner of lands when lands were owned by the old Catholic chieftains and clans back before the Cromwellian plantations and confiscation. And Scanlan is found as being the owner of lands at a place called Listowel na Fuca, which translated into English would be the Black Fort of the Fairies. And at the time before the Cromwellian confiscation and plantation, they were wise enough to map all Ireland and to classify the land into different categories, whether it was fertile, semi-fertile, just mountainy, whatever. And depending on its value, then it was given to the various adventurers who came with Cromwell as to what they were owed in terms of money. They were given land in lieu of money. And you may have heard of the phrase "to hell or to Connacht," which came from that because the land in Connacht wasn't worth a whole pile. So you had two options. If your land was being confiscated, you could either go to hell or go to Connacht. But anyway, to get back to this Listowel na Fuca, the Scanlan lands were transferred to an adventurer who came with Cromwell called Captain Reginald Kingbury. So it should be said, I suppose, that in all Ireland's checkered history, that the name Oliver Cromwell would probably be the most despised. But that being said, anyway, when Kingbury came, the Scanlans were, I suppose, fairly conniving people too, and clever in their own way, and wanted to hold on to some of their lands as much as they could. So some of them actually converted from being Catholics to become Protestants, which gave them certain rights, and they became serfs to Kingsbury and stayed with Kingsbury on the estate as serfs. But Sean Scanlan's, the man we're concerned about here, his immediate family didn't convert, and they went as outlaws. But when Captain Kingbury came, he was friendly with a man called Penn, who got lots of land in parts of County Cork, including my own home area here at Clonakilty. And they remained friendly for some time down to the next generation. But when it came to the time of William Penn to take over his lands in County Cork, including those here in Clonakilty, he decided land was not for him. And the Society of Friends, or the Quakers as we know them, had been set up in Ireland in 1654, comprising mostly of soldiers and farmers and merchants. And in 1670, William Penn decided to join the Society of Friends and to sell his lands. And apparently he was joined by some of the Scanlans who, when they had remained with Kingbury, they had changed their name from Scanlan to Harrison to be more accepted to the elite and to the Protestant community. So it is believed that a number of the Harrisons joined with William Penn to leave Ireland and to set sail for America. And there's a record of William Penn staying in the castle not far here from Clonakilty at Binduff Castle on the nights before he left for America. And we believe that some of the Harrisons were with him, and they took their journey to America, which is important in this story because, as you will know, at your end of the Atlantic, William Penn is the man who started the state of Pennsylvania. So anyway, as I say, Sean Scanlan's immediate family didn't convert. They went as outlaws into the hills and tried to fight their way back from there. And at that time, there was an organization which was a secret agrarian organization, nowadays to be termed as a sort of a terrorist organization. It was known as the Buachaillí Bána. Buachaillí meaning boys, and Bána meaning whites, but they were the white boys. They were terrorists in the 17th century, and they were a secret organization. They were oath-bound, and they were basically an organization amongst the peasantry. And the name was derived from the white smocks that they wore, and they only appeared at nighttime. So they were sort of ghostly figures, and the leadership of the organization was also sort of spiritual and ghostly. Nobody really knew who they were, whether they were real or not. And they, as I say, they operated by night, and there was the terror of the new landowners who would come in, like the King's boys and those. And they fought against the rack rents that were being applied by the new landlord, by the new gentry, by the tithe and the tax collections or for the Protestant clergy. They fought against evictions, religious suppression, and so forth. And the local leader in this Dubna was a man by the name of Donnacha Mór Dubh na Glanna, that would be in Gaelic, which translated would mean big black Guinness from the Glen. Now, Donnacha Mór Dubh apparently was a huge man. He was a fearsome figure. He was known to be able to break a man's back with his bare hands. So he was not a man to be trifled with. But this is important to the story.
Okay.
There would have been historic animosity between Donnacha Mór Dubh and Sean Scanlan, because, as I said earlier, the Scanlans were all Gaelic landowners themselves, but among their tenantry was the family of Donnacha Mór Dubh. So maybe they had been deprived or lost their lands at some stage, so there would have been a traditional animosity that would have existed between Donnacha Mór Dubh and Sean Scanlan. And I think as the story unfolds, that's probably an important item, you know.
Well, amazing, and I'll suggest that our eventual viewers do some background research on Oliver Cromwell and the atrocities committed there. That might take us too far afield, but yes. I think that our knowledge of that in America isn't always great. But I do want to stay on topic. So it was always surprising to us, this connection that locally, that a German would have come to what is Lancaster County and started making whiskey at the mill. That never really sat well with us. And so we wonder if Sean Scanlan had any background in distilling or whiskey that would have made sense for him to bring to America.
Yeah, like whiskey actually, Matt, is hugely significant to the story because Irish whiskey is one of the first to be distilled in Europe, commencing somewhere around the 12th century.
Wow.
So you see, the Irish monks and friars and those and priests were great travelers. They were constantly traveling to Europe on the high seas, on various ships and boats and so forth, and bringing back things with them. So the Irish monks brought back the technique of distilling perfumes back to their monasteries from their travel, and they succeeded in making beautiful perfumes themselves. And this would have happened somewhere around the year 1000 AD.
Wow.
So actually what happened then was the monks modified this technique from distilling perfume into distilling spirits. And this was called Ishka Baha. Ishka being the Irish for water, and Baha being the Irish for life.
For so life water, sure.
The water of life. So yeah. Phonetically, whiskey is Ishka Baha. And it should be remembered, and this is a message for the Scots, this all happened hundreds of years before the Scots thought at all about distilling whiskey. So close to where the Scandals lived, there was a monastery called Ahabaha. Aha would be a pathway or a ford to life. So whether it was a pathway to the spiritual life or a pathway to the life of whiskey, we don't know. But like the monks in the monastery in Ahabaha had been the hereditary spiritual advisors to the Scandals when they were landowners themselves. Now, I'm not sure if they were Franciscans or what orders they were, but they had contact with a number of monasteries. In fact, they had a lot of contact with a monastery not far from Clonakilty here. You may have visited there when you were a few years ago, down in Timilly Abbey, which was ransacked and sacked by Cromwell's forces as well. But the ruins are beautiful and been retained to this day. But they had close contact there, and that monastery actually was founded in the 6th century by Saint Pelagia, who was the man who brought honey to Ireland. So the monks had a tradition of bringing inventions back into the country. But anyway, by the 1500s, the English were very concerned about the manufacture of whiskey and how widespread it was in the country, and they had no control over it. And they obviously saw revenue and tax coming from it. So they introduced legislation to regulate it and to give the license, of course, to their own elite. But of course, this never worked in Ireland, because what happened then was the industry went underground and into the monasteries. And like the monastery at Ahabaha, that was sacked by Cromwell's forces in the 1650s. And what happened was, when the forces came into the monastery, they came across the whiskey, of course, and they decided they would indulge themselves in it. And when they left the monastery, they were in very good spirits. But unfortunately for them, they were seen by some Irish rapparees and outlaws who captured them and slaughtered them. They slaughtered the drunken Cromwellians in a place called the Glen of Gloucesteroon. And the Cromwellian bodies were never found. And the English authorities, of course, put out the word that the bodies had been devoured by the native Irish. But this wasn't the case. This was purely propaganda to try and show that the Irish were as savage as themselves. The fact was that bodies had been thrown over a cliff that was extremely narrow and extremely deep into a ravine, and that was inaccessible to man. So the bodies have rested there, I believe, ever since. But after the destruction of the monastery at Ahabaha, Sean Scanlan and others began distilling the secret recipe that had been in the monastery. And they began to make the illicit whiskey in the mountains and in the glens of their own area, which became a lucrative business. And Joel will know this, that this survived and still survives up to the present time, the distilling of illicit whiskey, which we now call poteen, maybe Mountain Dew. Poteen coming from the fact that this was distilled in a small pot, poteen, which means it's kind of a small pot. It was regulated in the 1990s, and licenses given to some of the distilleries, but the illegal stuff, which is a clear whiskey with tremendous medicinal powers, still remains in parts of rural Ireland. And I believe it has played a fairly important role as well during the COVID pandemic, that people have got beneficial results from it. And you can rest assured it will be much better drinking than the bleach that was being promoted by some people in America last year. The less said, the better. So that would be sort of the history of the distilling experience that Sean Scanlan would have had.
So you think it's at least plausible that he would have been able to pick up this skill and that he could have brought this to the New World. That is amazing, because it seems to confirm this kind of burgeoning theory. So a large part of what we're reading in this diary is this is where things get supernatural.